Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Colorado Health Foundation webinar on the Family, Friend, and Neighbor Caregiver Supports. I'd like to just give a few more seconds for anyone else to join us, and then we will get started. Thank you all for joining us here today. All righty, let's go ahead and get started. Again, welcome to the Colorado Health Foundation webinar on the Family, Friend, and Neighbor Caregiver Supports Funding Opportunity. My name is Miguel In Suk Lovato, and I am one of the senior program officers with the Colorado Health Foundation. I lead our early childhood social and emotional development priority. And I'm here today to talk about this funding opportunity. I do have some Colorado Health Foundation colleagues on the line as well. And we will be monitoring the Q&A section, and we'll be answering questions throughout the presentation and also at the end. Again, thank you all for joining us. Let me go over a few housekeeping items that I'd like to cover before we get started. First of all, the webinar is being recorded so that others who were not able to attend can watch the presentation at their leisure. The archived webinar will be made available on the webpage, on our webpage, and specifically the webpage for this funding opportunity. In order to minimize background noise, we've muted all of the participant audio, so you won't be able to make any comments during the presentation. But again, we want to make sure that you see the Q&A feature that's part of Zoom. Please take a moment and locate that at the bottom of your screens. And at any time during the presentation, please feel free to submit questions using the Q&A feature. We will be responding to those questions throughout the webinar, and any that need to be elevated for me to respond to, I'll do so at the end. Also, just wanted to point out, if you're experiencing any technical difficulties during the presentation, please type those into the chat feature, and we will have folks who are monitoring the chat feature, and hopefully we'll be able to address those during the presentation. But let's go ahead and get started. Our cornerstones outline who we serve, how our work is informed, and our intent to create health equity. Everything we do is informed by these three promises, and we expect the same from our partners. This year, our first cornerstone was updated to prioritize Coloradans of color. And so please take note of the cornerstones. And again, we expect all of this from the partners that we partner with. This slide demonstrates and gives an idea of the various focus areas and priorities that we have at the Colorado Health Foundation. For this particular priority, early childhood social emotional development, it sits under our program area of Nurture Healthy Minds. And you can see all of our focus areas, all of our program areas there. Under Nurture Healthy Minds, under this focus area, we are addressing the behavioral health needs of our state by fostering the social emotional development of children, equipping young and young adults with resiliency skills, and giving adults with mental health and substance use challenges continued support on their recovery journey. And so these are the three priorities: early childhood social emotional development, youth and young adult resiliency, and adult recovery. And again, today we're focusing in on early childhood social emotional development. Our priority statement is to enhance services and supports that foster social, emotional development and resiliency of young children. Which brings us to our funding opportunity. We know that not all communities have access to early childcare grounded in social emotional development. We also know that even in areas where there is more access, spaces at early childcare centers are limited. Especially for working families, this means that children are cared for in the age-old network of family, friends, and neighbors. Depending on the community, it is estimated that between 60 and 90% of children are in this organic network of FFN providers. Further, the inequities continue as FFN providers are often not connected to the broader early child care ecosystem. This means that they may not have access to early childhood training. They may be eligible for the Colorado Child Care Assistance Program, CCAP, and may not know it, and may not have opportunities to connect with other early child care providers, including other FFN providers. We define FFN care as home-based early child care in the caregiver's or the child's home, provided by caregivers who are relatives, nannies, or parents supporting other children in addition to their own. And this type of childcare takes place outside of an early childcare center, a program or a family childcare home, an FCC. At the foundation, we understand the urgency of providing Coloradans of every age with the resources they need to support mental and social well-being. Children need stable, responsive, and trusting relationships with those that love them and caring adults that support their social emotional development. Regardless of childcare setting, care providers should have access to the resources and supports that enable them to build strong, stable, responsive relationships that are at the heart of building a strong foundation for children's healthy development and well-being. This funding opportunity is not set up to support FFN providers directly, but rather organizations that work with FFN providers to provide them the support they need for the children in their care. Specifically, eligible applicants will work with FFN caregivers serving Coloradans living on low income and those historically experiencing less power and privilege. Our funding criteria. These are some of the criteria that are the bare minimum that we're looking for applications that are coming in the door. One, that they align with our cornerstones and promote conditions for healthy social, emotional development and resiliency of young children. That they establish the ability to outreach and engage FFN caregivers and utilize strong social and community networks. That they ensure capacity to offer culturally relevant programming and infrastructure and services. And our last criteria is that FFN caregivers and or the families they serve are serving in an advisory or a co-designer role. We're looking to support efforts that address one or more of the following. Efforts that grow an understanding of healthy social emotional development and culturally relevant strategies. Efforts that have improved access to culturally relevant resources in their communities to support their work and families they serve. Efforts that establish practices to foster strong partnerships with parents for the children that they serve. And efforts that enhance family, friend, and neighbor caregivers' ability to manage stress and support their own mental well-being. We have a preference for programs and projects that focus on building the strength of caregivers as a way to improve social and emotional development of children. We have a preference towards considering FFN caregivers' well-being, including understanding and coping with stress. We have a preference for programs and projects that acknowledge and build on the strengths of families and caregivers. We have a preference for programs and projects that consider how trauma may impact families and caregivers and embody strategies that are sensitive to the hard realities and resiliency present in the care setting. We have a preference towards programs and projects that are based on input from caregivers, available information about local needs and lessons about what works in other places with similar characteristics. And we have a preference for programs and projects that consider multiple ways to reach caregivers to overcome barriers. Online training, nights and weekends, in-home supports, programs that may pay care providers for their participation. This is not an exhaustive list, but some activities we're interested in supporting include planning and outreach efforts to grow understanding of local FFN capacity needs, established early childhood programs that are made available to FFN caregivers, strategies that eliminate geographic barriers or barriers to in-person connections as a result of COVID-19. We're interested in activities that leverage existing infrastructure to extend to FFN caregivers. Home visitation programs for FFN homes, virtual or in person. Group training programs, again, virtual or in person. And support groups, virtual or in person. Some more examples of broadly of efforts that we're interested in are social emotional development, the knowledge of healthy childhood development, including strategies to advance social emotional development of young children. Mental health, supporting family, friend, and neighbor caregivers' understanding of trauma and mental health and bolstering their own well-being. Resources, raising awareness of and connections to available resources to support caregivers and families. And family engagement and care delivery, practices to support positive relationships with families and overall sustainable care delivery. Organizations that may apply include community-based nonprofits, community colleges, community-based coalitions, early childhood councils, family resource centers, local institutions who are viewed as trusted partners, and maybe public libraries. Again, not an exhaustive list, but a few examples of organizations that may apply. And again, we are looking for strong applicants, or strong applicants will be those that are serving Coloradans living on low income and those who have historically experienced less power and privilege. Some need to know grant information. First, the grant deadline is Tuesday, June 15th, 2021. The grant term, these can be requests up to 2 years in length. Grant amounts generally range from $50,000 to $150,000 per year. And then everyone will have a grant decision by mid-September. Let's now open it up for questions. And again, we may have received some of those through the Q&A function. Let me pull that one up here. All right. Oh, I think we have it there. What types of organizations are you interested in supporting? Again, you know, I hopefully I answered that, but you know, just to reiterate, you know, in terms of the types of organizations, you know, community-based nonprofits, coalitions, trusted community partners, and then again, those that are able to demonstrate the ability to outreach to FFN providers effectively, to include them, that they're part of the, they really are part of informing the work that the organization does. Ideally, organizations have had some inroads with FFN providers. You know, it's not that we won't consider organizations that haven't engaged with FFN, but I would say, at least to date, the organizations that we have funded have had some traction with family, friend, and neighbor providers, and positive traction in terms of including them with the programs that they are offering. All right. Oh, I think all right. Other questions folks have? Let's see here.
Miguel, there was one more. This is Angel. And the question is, what is the monetary ranges of grants you're looking to support?
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for calling that out. Generally, you saw here in this last slide. Let's see if I can pull this up. Grant awards generally range from $50,000 to $150,000 per year. But again, these are general ranges. Organizations certainly can request amounts that are realistic for them. But I think in a general sense, this is the general range that we have that we've funded in the past. I have a question here in the chat or the Q&A feature around defining young children. What is the age range of young people FFN caregivers provide for? For us, for the Colorado Health Foundation, we have decided to go with the childhood framework, the state childhood framework definition. And so we are defining young children as that age range from birth to age 8. So it does go into that elementary school age, elementary school ages. So 0 through age 8 for us. All right. Okay, I've got another question here. Can funding be used to support basic needs of FFN and children in their care? That's a great question. So I would say that the majority of the funding that we're looking to support, or the majority of funding that we are providing, is used to support children's social emotional development, training for those providers, the mental health needs of those FFN caregivers, versus things like expendable items that FFN care providers may need to use, diapers or other types of expendables. The dollars are really not meant to be used for those types of things. And so when we're talking about those types of basic needs, it's not meant to be supportive of those types of needs, but rather training and those types of supports. Question, would this grant support public schools? I will say that to date, we haven't supported any public schools with this funding opportunity. That said, I mean, it really would depend. I mean, if a public school or a system felt that they could demonstrate all of the criteria, that they were meeting the criteria in a very deep and authentic way, we certainly wouldn't say that a public school isn't eligible to apply. But I think the bar for that community level engagement is very high, especially for this funding opportunity. All right, another question. Do we help FFN who are undocumented? And so two things. One, we don't. The funding that's provided is to organizations that are working with FFN providers. So the funding that we're providing is not specifically for those FFN providers, but we don't have any guidelines around who those FFN supporting organizations are serving. In fact, many of the FFN providers we're serving are serving those who may lack documentation. Okay, so if many of the FFN network include folks who have documentation or not, and we are supporting those organizations working with those populations. Yeah. All right. Can you remind us if FFN also includes parents who are caring for their own children and children who are not theirs? That's a great question. And yes, so if a parent is providing care for their own children, in addition to other children who are not theirs, those are, under our definition, family, friend, and neighbor providers. So oftentimes they are taking care of and providing care for children who are not their, who are their own children, as well as those who are not their own. Another question, how might an applicant demonstrate that programming and services are culturally responsive and relevant? Great question. I think that, again, when we go through our due diligence process, we really dig in to understand this piece here. We think that it's beyond just the translation of existing materials, training materials, programming from one language to another. Cultural relevant and cultural responsiveness for us means that there's a deeper level of understanding the particularities of cultures. How is programming delivered? What pieces are applicable and what pieces are not applicable for certain cultural or groups? How are those communities, how are folks from various different cultures informing the programming so that it is in fact relevant for their community? So again, beyond, it's definitely beyond looking at translation from one language to another. Another question here, would you support materials needed for training FFNs, such as children's books that drive the training curricula, etc.? Yes, I would say that certainly falls, at least to me, it falls into the overall category of supporting those FFN providers with relevant materials, training, support. To me, that doesn't fall into the criteria of basic needs or ongoing materials, but especially I think if it is viewed as key to the FFN providers work with children and they're addressing social emotional development of the children in their care, I don't think that that would be outside of the criteria. Another question, do you have any restrictions on what you don't fund? Well, so I mean, there's certainly a, there's a lot of pieces that we are not funding specifically. So, for example, we're not supporting FFN providers directly with these funds, although the funds go to an organization that is working with FFN providers. As we've talked about, any of the ongoing expendable needs that FFN providers have. I mentioned diapers or other pieces of equipment or pieces that they need to keep their FFN their care environment set up. We're not really looking to support those types of things. But I will say this: if you do have particular questions, please reach out to us, and we can look at your particular situation and try and answer some of those if something would fit or not. All right, just checking. I don't see any other questions in the chat.
Miguel, there was another question in the chat earlier that related to the size of the organization. Is there a range of the overall organizational budget that we prefer to fund? So larger organizations versus smaller organizations?
Great question. I think that we pride ourselves with the Colorado Health Foundation with not going to and pushing ourselves to not go to the usual suspects. And there's nothing wrong with some of the usual suspects. I'm not throwing any shade to them, but we're trying to push ourselves outside of those boundaries. So we have certainly supported organizations that have been established for many, many years. And we've supported startup mom and pop shops that have just gotten off the ground and maybe have just got off the ground during the pandemic. So in terms of the types of organizations, the size of organizations, they really, really vary. All right, another question here. Has Colorado Health Foundation done any surveys, research about the best ways to engage FFN providers and or what they believe their needs are? So we, prior to me coming on board, we certainly did a lot of work to understand this FFN space. I joined the foundation 1 year ago, and during that time, or prior to me coming on board, there was certainly a lot of work done to just understand the landscape of early childhood and specifically this family, friend, and neighbor space. Since I have come on board, we haven't done explicit outreach to the FFN providers that are being supported by the organizations we support right now, but we have reached out to all of our support organizations to understand just a little bit more what is going on with the in relationship to the pandemic, what is going on with FFN providers in your care, what needs do they have. So we're trying to stay connected through the organizations that we're supporting right now. But beyond that, we haven't done any explicit outreach yet to FFN providers. All right, let's see here. How long does the grant review process take, and when will we know if when funds are awarded, if they are awarded? Again, looking at the slide here, you all will have a decision by mid-September at the latest. We really push ourselves to get answers to folks within 90 days. And so within 90 days of submission of the application on June 15th, we'll let everyone know one way or the other if they've been awarded. And sorry, I think I missed this question from the chat. FFN also mentioned adult recovery. Does the actual service have to service the children directly? If programming provides support for caregivers that benefits the children, does that qualify for this opportunity? So under this focus area of nurture healthy minds, adult recovery is one of our priorities, specifically adult recovery. And adult recovery is related to behavioral health and mental health challenges, substance use challenges that they may be facing. So just using that language of adult recovery, that's what we mean there. Now, under early childhood, for this specific funding opportunity, we are looking to support organizations that are reaching those adults, those FFN caregivers, and specifically to address the social emotional needs of children. Now, in doing so, they may very well be focused on the mental health needs of those FFN providers in order to ultimately serve children well and to provide for the social emotional development of children. So while it's not explicitly connected to our adult recovery priority, it's through adults that we are hoping to ultimately affect children. All right, reporting requirements. So for any of the grants that we award through these funding opportunities, we do ask folks to submit reports to us so that we can gauge the progress of those, as well as be able to have some learning and some open dialogue. So we want it not to be a one-way street where you're just reporting back to us, although there is a compliance component of that. But we also want to learn from what's going on the ground. We want to hear from you in terms of what's going on and what's happening on the ground. Multi-year grants, there's an interim report, and then there's a final report that's submitted. And so we certainly want to, those are, specific touch points. And in addition to that, we love to keep the door open for what's going on the ground, what's happening. We want to know the good and the bad. So please, stay in touch with us as much as possible, but don't feel like you have to like you have to touch base with us every moment along the way. Is there anything organizations in rural communities should keep in mind to make sure to include in the application? Let me grab some water real quick. I would say that one of the things that we really try to understand is community context. And while we have program officers who are pre-pandemic out in community fairly often, and we push ourselves to be out in community very often, we still don't live in the communities, especially rural communities. Everyone who works for the Colorado Health Foundation is home base is in the Denver metro area, but we push ourselves to get out in communities. Now, that said, it is important, I think, for you all from rural communities to help us understand community context, help us understand what's going on in your community that we may not know. We think we know, but maybe we don't know. And so try and help us understand the specific context in your community. That is going to go a long way, I think, when you're submitting an application to help us understand that. Great questions, you all. You're keeping me on my toes. All right, we have another question here. If an organization has programs that align with both the Healthy Minds and the caregiving initiatives, can an organization apply for both? That's a great question. I think my answer would be is to contact us. Contact us and let's talk about it, just so we understand both requests. And through that conversation, it might make sense for you to apply for one or the other. That said, organizations certainly can apply for both. There's nothing that says that you can't, but I would say contact us and let us have some dialogue and give you some better advice. In terms of contacting us, I'm going to, and I'll hit this here at the end as well, but I just want to point this out. In terms of contacting us, you can contact a program staff by sending a general email to funding@coloradohealth.org, and that's a way for you to reach us. So again, when I say contact us there. And just to point these out here, stay on our mailing list. That gives you up-to-date information about upcoming funding opportunities, and just a general good way to stay engaged with us. It's if you go to our website, coloradohealth.org /join, I believe is the exact address. Yes, coloradohealth.org/join. You can join our mailing list. And of course, be sure to follow us on our social media outlets as well. All right, go back to questions. If an organization has programs that align, oh, okay, I think we already did that one. Got that one there. All right, other questions folks have? Okay, and let me check the chat before I do anything here. All right. Okay, looks like we have one more question. Will an organization get a site visit this cycle? That is a great question. So to date, during the pandemic, that is, we have been conducting virtual site visits. And for organizations that move forward in the due diligence process, we have scheduled time to have a virtual site visit via Zoom. Some of those have been incredibly creative in how they show us around by maybe picking up a laptop and giving us a tour or having us speak to other folks. And so we've made it work. We are in the process now of looking at re-engaging with community in person, given where we are at this stage in the pandemic. I will say that as we are transitioning and as we are looking at how we engage with folks in person, some of it will depend on the program officer who is working with your particular application, and you personally as well, or organizations who are applying, in terms of comfort around meeting in person and preference in terms of how to conduct that site visit. So a lot of it, I think, will be done, through those conversations with your program officer in terms of how to conduct those site visits. Yes. All right. Other questions? Well, everyone, thank you for taking time to be with us here today. Hopefully this gave you some good information that'll help you when you're thinking about applying. And there is a question in the chat around the application being in Spanish. And unfortunately, we don't have the applications translated into other languages. But we do have staff who are proficient in a couple of different languages. So I wanted to point out, I mean, you don't see his name on here, but one of my colleagues, Angel Villalobos, is one of our Spanish-speaking colleagues. Leslie Fajardo Fo is another one of my Spanish-speaking colleagues. Mi español es muy mal. And so I would pass my any Spanish speaking requests over to one of my colleagues to help out. One of my other colleagues, Kine Nguyen, is one of our Vietnamese speaking colleagues. And so so while the application isn't in Spanish, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to us and let's see see what we can do to help you out. And you saw that there in the chat that we are exploring some options for the future. Great questions. All right. Make sure I'm not missing anything here. Oh, okay. Thank you, Angel, and thank you, Leslie. Well, again, everyone, I want to thank you for joining us on this webinar here today. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have any further questions. We love to dialogue with you before you put in the time to submit an application, and we look forward to meeting some of you in person at some point here in the future. Thank you so much.